I got home late after a tough mediation meeting where the two parties were more focused on hurting each other than resolving the issue, making my job nearly impossible. Sometimes involving lawyers is the only solution, but I strive to help people find common ground. I'm Mike Absalom, a mediator working for a company hired by legal firms to avoid court. We aim for mutual understanding, though it's not always successful. Growing up as one of 6 kids, I often settled disputes among my siblings. Our mom raised us alone after Dad passed, leaving us as latchkey kids. I always ended up being the peacemaker. Mediation wasn't planned. While working in a factory and studying creative writing in college, I resolved conflicts between management and workers. An arbitration company brought me in for a dispute, and it led to a job offer. I switched my major to business with a minor in psychology and joined the company full-time. As a mediator, I've handled various disputes from movie companies to car manufacturers. I also mediate divorces, focusing on asset division when other solutions fail. My approach relies on vulnerability and honesty, meeting both sides separately to understand their perspectives and needs. Orson Scott Card's story about a girl severing connections between people resonated with me. While I can't see connections, I untangle conflicts and create new resolutions through understanding. At home, I don't practice this with my wife. I needed you to understand my background and approach because it'll matter later on. I'm 6 feet tall, weigh 197 pounds. Yes, I have a Johnson. No, it's not huge or small, it does the job. My wife, Christy, is the love of my life. When people say having kids is amazing, it's just words until you experience it. The whole idea of saying we are pregnant always made me chuckle because it's mostly the woman who deals with all the challenges. When we were expecting, everyone offered advice like, do this before the baby comes, and have fun now, you won't later, ending with, but it'll be the best thing ever. It always seemed contradictory to me. Christy and I couldn't have children. She had severe pain from her first period and had to undergo surgery to remove parts of her reproductive system. It was described as cancer waiting to happen, so they removed any chance of her having kids. By the time we got together, she had come to terms with it, but it was still a painful topic. I loved kids and thought I'd have them someday, but choosing between Christy and having children was an easy decision. We considered using donor eggs and surrogacy, but I never felt right about it. Christy carried a deep guilt about not having children, seeing surrogacy as a punishment from God. It took therapy for us to understand and begin healing from it. We decided to embrace our childless life and traveled extensively, running with the bulls, visiting the pyramids, exploring Pompeii, diving in Pearl Harbor, wine tasting in Napa Valley, and bungee jumping off the Sydney Harbor Bridge. We truly lived life to the fullest. Our friends with children drifted away as their lifestyles differed from ours. Plans to get together rarely happened due to their parental responsibilities. After our friends left our downtown condo in Bellevue, a wealthy suburb of Seattle, Christy and I would often laugh and say, glad we don't have kids. Maybe it masked our own feelings of emptiness, but we enjoyed ourselves, indulging in leisurely closeness on the balcony without worry. Overall, we were content. I had my intense work, and Christy, a curator at a technology museum in Seattle, had hers. It was amusing. She loved gadgets, while I enjoyed classical music and opera. We joked that our brains were swapped. We've been married for nearly 12 years. We met at a lawn hockey match. I'd recently moved to Seattle and ended up at the match because a colleague invited me. The co-ed game was intense, with women hitting the men hard. As I watched a man get hit hard in the shins, I noticed someone beside me. Do you think he'll ever want to play on a co-ed team again? She asked. I wouldn't. Going home limping isn't a great way to end a game, I replied awkwardly. She smiled and remarked, oh, I can think of ways to make that situation fun. Not like that, though. Nice chatting with you. Then she wandered off. It was an electrifying encounter. Christy stood about 5'7", with brown hair streaked blonde, captivating eyes, and a plump, inviting mouth. Her figure was well-proportioned, and she had a shapely rear end. As I watched her walk away, I kicked myself for my lackluster responses. Later, I saw her again at the makeshift bar. They only had cheap drinks, so I chose the least offensive wine. Turning around, I spotted her engrossed in a small black device. She didn't notice me until I cleared my throat. She apologized, showing me the device. It's a visor, a new PDA, she explained. I looked confused, so she quickly moved aside. She got her drink and smiled, saying, we keep running into each other. I smiled back. What's a visor? Let's talk. We talked for an hour. I learned she was a tech enthusiast, librarian, and historian. She was there to support a friend and mentioned wanting to see the latest Harry Potter movie but didn't want to go alone. I took the hint, and that's how it began. We were in a relationship within 4 weeks and married 10 months later. Our chaotic wedding was a mix of my rowdy family and her more reserved upper-class relatives, who eventually joined the fun. Christy had a sister, a brother in the army often deployed, and divorced but amicable parents. I didn't know her brother well due to his deployments, but we shared beers and conversations about her past relationships. Our years together were filled with growth, fun, and exploration. We often behaved like teenagers and were true partners in every sense. We joined groups together, me in poetry, her in painting. She'd joke about my abstract attempts, saying, "Looks like you're still in your 7-year-old phase," and laugh. We both owned mountain bikes and loved exploring Seattle's trails, often taking biking weekends to Portland and Vancouver. Biking became our main form of exercise. It wasn't always perfect. We argued and disagreed. Christy had a temper and a sharp sarcasm that could cut deep, sometimes leading to public arguments. I tried both retreating and arguing, but neither worked well. Retreating made me look weak. Arguing damaged things around us. Christy knew exactly what she was doing. To others, she was delightful and polite. With me, she freely expressed her displeasure, which felt like trust but also worried me about her mental well-being. What really infuriated her was when I used my freaking Jedi mind tricks. Switching into mediator mode escalated our arguments. She learned not to bring up my mother after a weekend in a motel because I kicked her out. She often had valid reasons to be upset. I'm not easy to live with, moody, quick-tempered, and critical. I could provoke bad situations, preferring to handle them privately. She usually realized when she went too far and would apologize, but I'd still struggle afterward. Our bed life was amazing, perfectly matched. We explored fantasies, tried daring things, and role-played until a confrontation ended it. Our relationship was complex, filled with intense emotions and unique experiences. Despite all that, we were happy. At least, I thought so. My work could be demanding at times and occasionally required travel. Being a freelance contractor for my company meant I had to go where the work was, but these trips were infrequent and short-lived. Christy also traveled occasionally for her museum job, especially to tech companies donating old equipment. A few times I tagged along, enduring boring lectures about outdated technology and its former value, which wasn't exactly my idea of fun. Yet on those trips, I got to golf in Arizona during winter, gamble on nickel slots, and enjoy intimate moments with my wife in hotel rooms, so I couldn't complain too much. But let's get back to the evening that changed everything, which is really what this story is about anyway. I walked into our condo with its nice view, tossed my jacket on a chair, and called out, "I'm home! What's for dinner?" The lights were on, so I knew Christy was home too. Her Mazda Miata MX-5 was parked in the underground lot. Our condo's entrance led directly into the kitchen, where I grabbed a low-calorie beer, or as she called it, diet beer, and wandered into the living room. There she was, sitting on the couch with her knees together, looking up at me nervously, biting her lip. But it wasn't her demeanor that caught my attention. It was the guy sitting next to her. "Honey?" she began weakly. I froze, staring in disbelief at what I saw. Her body language was a mix of regret, nervousness, and defiance, all familiar to me after years of being together. You can't live with someone that closely for so long without understanding their expressions. Well, apparently you can, as I was learning. But in that moment, I could read the entire situation clearly. As for the guy, he was young, sporting a smile that was just a notch shy of confrontational. Not quite a sneer, but close. It was the classic arrogance disguised with a hint of sensitivity. He might have even believed it himself, but his body language clearly asserted dominance and ownership over her. She leaned forward. He leaned back, arms spread out along the sides of the couch, one behind her. She tilted slightly forward to avoid looking like he had his arm around her, but she hadn't removed it either. She was trying hard to downplay the situation, not realizing her efforts were making it look worse. Now she appeared guilty rather than regretful. Just by looking at them, I could piece together part of the situation. I knew what had been going on. I wasn't sure where they thought things were heading, whether it was a confession and promise not to repeat or a breakup talk, but I knew what had happened beforehand. You can't miss it when you witness something like this. I glanced at them for a moment longer, then slumped into the chair next to the couch, positioned at a right angle to it. This placed me right next to the guy, who gave me what he probably thought was a concerned look. Christy frowned as I sat down, and I could interpret the expressions on her face. Our seating arrangement was really bad. If I lost my temper, she wouldn't be able to intervene. But it was too late for that now. They were clearly following some kind of script. and I had to suppress the anger churning in my stomach to figure out what that script entailed. I cracked open the beer, took a deep sigh, and had a long sip. Christy bit her lip again, as if about to say something but held back. I figured she might have been thinking something like, yes, a beer would be good right about now. I chuckled to myself, struck by a thought. It's funny how people react to sudden stress like this. I'd seen it before, and always found it puzzling. People say the most ridiculous things or bring up irrelevant points in such situations. In my line of work, I'd witnessed it often and wondered silently what goes through their minds at that precise moment. It seemed they were in complete denial of the reality of the situation, and here I was experiencing it myself. What? Christy asked, a hint of annoyance in her voice that she quickly masked. I took another sip of beer, then said, I was just thinking. I know you so well, I can read your body language. I was just thinking that you couldn't possibly hide your body language like this in a situation like this, not when you know them so well. And then it occurred to me that you've done exactly that, haven't you? I had no clue. She grimaced slightly, then took a breath. Well, yes, I guess so, but that's partly what this intervention, I guess, is about. Intervention? I interrupted, dripping sarcasm from the word. Is that what you are calling this little event? Why not something nicer? Get together, perhaps? Come to Jesus, even? It slipped out before I could stop myself. I shouldn't have, though. I usually keep my composure better than that. Mike, she said reproachfully, stressing the two-syllable word. Oh, by all means, dear wife, I retorted, emphasizing wife in the same manner. Do go ahead. I wouldn't want to derail your script. I glanced at the guy sitting next to her and noticed he had opened one of my beers. The white-hot rage I was starting to feel intensified another notch. Mike, you just said it yourself. You had no clue. I think it's fair to say, then, that in reality, you not only didn't notice, but there was nothing to notice, right? No telltale signs, no drop in affection or closeness, right? She was right. I hadn't noticed. I wasn't really paying attention either, but trusting her implicitly can lead to that. But still, I'm usually observant. My job depends on it, and I don't take her for granted. Even after 11 years, I still surprised her with flowers for no reason. Had them sent to her work, took her away for weekends, bought little gifts. Anything to show her how much I cared. That's why this hurt so much from my perspective. My mind raced, asking questions I didn't have answers to. Had I not given her enough? What more could she have wanted? What drove her to this? Why? I struggled to control my emotions. I knew I wouldn't get any answers if I lost my temper, tempting as it was. I was smart enough to know that I might explode at some point, but I wanted answers first, and this was a way to get some. I wouldn't get all of them, and she would outright lie about some. It was inevitable. I knew she still loved me and wouldn't want to hurt me more than necessary, so she'd lie about the things she felt would hurt me most. It was only human. But that's the thing. I knew she loved me. I was completely sure of it. Even with the evidence that her love had been shared around, I still believed in it. Maybe I was fooling myself, but I don't know. Some things in life you just know, and I knew she loved me. I guess I was just fooling myself about the part where she loved me exclusively. I gestured with the beer, not trusting myself to speak yet. Christy took that as confirmation and continued, speaking calmly. So, logically then, if I never gave you less than you've always had from me, how does this affect you? I'm still the same person I've always been. This, she gestured at the man beside her, is just an additional dimension. Nothing changes. I still love you and will always be everything to you that I've always been. And I want the same from you. Can't you see that? You haven't lost anything here. So that's how it was. She was actively hoping I'd accept this, see it from her perspective. It was clever. She was trying to do to me what I do professionally, make me see things from her point of view, put myself in her shoes, metaphorically. There was a moment of silence. Then she said, It's not you, honey. Not in any way. You are not lacking at all. Please understand that. You rock my world and always will. You just what, Christy? I interrupted, amazed that I hadn't flipped the coffee table over and hurt someone. Just needed more than I could give. The flowers, the gifts, the weekends away, the love. I sneered at the last word. Just weren't enough for you? Does he have a huge Johnson? Is that it? Christy's composure began to crack, tears starting to well up. The guy sitting next to her leaned forward with concern, shooting me a hostile look. Christy, he said, his voice unexpectedly deep. Babe, it's okay. Hang in there like we agreed. His arm around her shifted, pulling her closer. That pushed me over the edge. Leaning forward, I said, "Hey, a-hole, we're practically brothers now." And as I said that, I placed my hand on the back of his hand, still on his lap. In one swift move, I grabbed his index finger and pulled it sharply upwards. He had no choice but to comply, afraid it might break. With his arm around Christy, he was stuck, and as I applied more pressure to his finger, bending it awkwardly, he twisted to relieve the pain. Trapped with his arm behind Christy, he couldn't move much. "Mike, please," Christy pleaded helplessly. I shot her a quick, venomous look, then focused on the guy in front of me. She wisely stayed put, though she looked like she wanted to move. Even she wasn't that foolish. "Listen, a-hole, that's my wife you're with. Whatever you think you're doing, she's still my wife." I emphasized the word wife and bent his finger further. "That's my couch you're sitting on in my apartment, drinking my beer. And frankly, moron, I'm not impressed with your little white knight act. You're only here because the 403, Christy winced at that word, wants you here, but I don't want you here. So shut the hell up and don't say a word or things will get worse. I've got your finger now and I can use 4 more on one hand if I need to. Don't piss me off any more than you already have or you'll regret it. Got it?" He nodded desperately and I released his finger. He sat back, withdrawing his arm from Christy, rubbing his sore finger vigorously and glaring at me. I held his gaze. "Not a word, a hole, remember that." Then I turned to Christy, who looked even paler but quickly composed herself. "That was unnecessary, Mike. James wouldn't have hurt you. He's just here for me, to support me. He's not a threat." "Really? How nice for him. But he better keep quiet. I won't hit you, but damn. I feel like hitting someone right now and he's here. Mike, please. Please understand. This wasn't planned. It just happened." "What happened, Christy? Did you trip and fall onto his Johnson?" It was a line I'd heard before and it slipped out. She sighed. "No, nothing like that. We just worked together and it happened. I'm sorry. I don't know what else to say. I love 2 men. I love you, always have and always will. But I love James too. I can't explain it. It's not the same. There are similarities, but I love you both in different ways. Please, try to understand." I took another sip of beer as I thought about how to respond. Setting the beer down, I simply said, "That's not true." She bristled. "Yes, it is. You know I love you. You can't doubt that. I've always treated you with love and consideration, even when—" She hesitated, then continued. "Other things were going on. I made sure you never felt anything less than my full commitment. That won't change." She stared at me intensely, almost daring me to challenge her. Her words sounded like she was declaring how things would be from now on, using classic leadership tactics. Not today, Christy, I thought. The thing is, in my line of work, dealing with vulnerability, bringing people together through common ground and fairness, it can bring people closer, but in the wrong hands, it can tear them apart. I try not to do that. While I understand what unites people, I also know how to create division. It's like a massage therapist who can either relieve pain or cause it by knowing the right spots. I have that power too, though I hate having it. When I'm angry, I can really hurt someone. And I was furious then. She needed to understand my pain and her role in causing it. She needed a reality check about her future, and I was going to shake that up with my words right then and there. Looking back, I'm partly ashamed of what I did, but also proud that I didn't just give in and let things happen. What I did wasn't great, but what was the alternative? I couldn't give her what she wanted because it wasn't what I wanted. It was the opposite. There was no middle ground here as I saw it. If we had agreed to open our marriage together, that would be one thing. But we hadn't, and I wouldn't have agreed to that anyway. I believed in being faithful. So what she wanted was the exact opposite of what I wanted. Her actions with that guy next to her made it clear that was all she was willing to accept. I wasn't going to give in to her, so as far as my profession's rules go, it was essentially over, except for dividing up the CD collection. I cocked my head at her. I knew what mattered to her. I understood how difficult this must have been for her, how she must have struggled with the decision. I imagined she'd find it hard to face herself in the mirror after today. Time to make things even more painful. And what if I refuse? What if I say I won't accept that, Christy? That I don't share, and neither should you? What about the promises we made? Don't they mean anything? She had the decency to look away. I get why you're angry, Mike. I would be too. But I'm here to help you through this. Look, this has been going on for a while. You were unaware until now because I respect you and think you deserve to know. I don't know what will happen next, but I know what I want to happen. I think you can handle this. I think you will. What we have together is too important to let go. You know it. You know we're better together than apart. This, she gestured towards the guy again, doesn't change that. I don't know how to make you see that. It's like a second job or something. She had no clue about the depth of my anger. She exhibited all the typical signs of someone who had dismissed the idea of understanding the negative reaction because there was no acceptable way to deal with it or acknowledge being at fault. Most people did this. When they've done something wrong, they tend to minimize the reaction because admitting otherwise would mean acknowledging a serious wrongdoing. No one wants to do that because then they'd have to confront it. I snorted and said, "You really believe that, huh? How did you think this would play out, Christy? How did you expect to soothe my hurt feelings? How did you plan to fix all this?" She blinked at that, but I'll give her credit. She gathered herself. "I don't know. You'd have to tell me. Whatever you want." "Okay, no problem. Tell this jerk you're done and you want him out of here right now, and he can forget your number." Leaning forward, I locked eyes with her. "That's what I want, Christy. Do that." She looked at me for a moment, then turned away. "So it's not just anything then?" I asked with an icy tone. There was a brief silence. I heard the grandfather clock on the wall, a gift from her mother on our 10-year anniversary, chime, marking the passing minutes. "Mike, why can't you see? Nothing has to change. We're having this conversation now because I refuse to deceive you. It's tearing me apart, pretending. I need to be free. Don't you want that for me? I respect you enough to tell you, to make you understand. To accept?" I finished her sentence. She nodded, a tear forming at the corner of her eye. "How long have we been married, Christy?" I asked abruptly. 11 years, she replied, unsure. "Right. And in all that time, have I ever given you the impression that this would be okay with me? That I'd accept it, overcome this, and move on?" Once again, she looked away. Point for Team Mike. She insulted my intelligence and understanding of who I am, deliberately ignoring reality. "No," she said softly. Then she looked back. "But you can. I know you can. Our life is built on pure love for each other. If you truly love me, you'll let me have this." "Pure love? And this is how you show it? Falling for someone else and sleeping with him? Is that pure love? What's pure hate in your world? Murdering me first? That's not fair, Mike. I didn't plan this. I don't want to hurt you. Well, you've done a damn good job of it anyway." "I'm sorry." "So am I. Doesn't change much, does it?" I took another sip of beer. I couldn't taste it, just cold and wet. I pondered my next move. I knew how difficult this must have been for her to admit. That's why that jerk was sitting there with her. She couldn't face me alone. But she had no clue about the depth of my pain. Hell, even I didn't fully grasp it at that moment. "Christy, how do you think I feel right now?" I asked gently. She glanced at the guy next to her, James. He nodded at her encouragingly. "I think you must be hurting, angry, upset with me for doing this to us, to you. But you don't understand. It's not what you think. We can work through this. I still love you and always will. I need you to know that's all that matters. I love you. I'll always love you, always be yours. We just need to get through this, adjust a little. We'll be together forever, remember? Like lobsters?" She was talking about an episode of the TV show Friends we had watched. We both loved the idea of the old lobster couple and even dressed up as lobsters for Halloween that year. "I don't think you understand at all. You've completely shattered my heart, you know? Everything I believed our relationship was built on feels like a lie." The pain surged out of me, raw and intense. "No, it's not," Christy cut in. "That's the thing. It's not. I'm still me. You're still you. Our marriage is still the same. There's just another aspect to it now. A new dimension. You need to grasp that. Nothing fundamental has changed. You needed to know, that's all." "Why, Christy? Why did I need to know? Why couldn't you have just kept sneaking around?" I paused, wanting to make a point. She seemed taken aback. "You would have preferred me to keep cheating?" "No, that's not what I meant. Why did I have to know?" "Because it was tearing me apart," she replied, sounding slightly confused, not seeing my point. "Sneaking around and pretending at home was unfair to you." "Exactly. So why were you sneaking around? Why was it tearing you apart?" "Because it was..." She trailed off, realizing where I was going. "Wrong?" I suggested. She just stared at me. "You were sneaking around because deep down you knew it was wrong. You knew I'd be furious, hurt, and devastated if I found out. You hid your deceitful actions because you knew they were destructive and morally wrong. There was a moment of silence. Then she said, "We just needed to find a way to tell you that would minimize the pain." "How's that working out so far, you think?" I retorted sarcastically. She didn't reply. "And you still have no clue how I feel right now. Everything you're saying is just words. Oh, I'm sure this is difficult for you, so tough. Neither of you are sacrificing a damn thing, are you? It's all on me to accept this, while for you, it's a settled matter. You've lost nothing. You're having your cake and eating it too. And this guy here, well, I don't even know what he's giving up. Probably nothing. He gets you without guilt, sneaking around. Big deal." He stared at me, ready to speak, but my glare made him pause. I looked pointedly at his finger and set my beer down, preparing myself for something. He hesitated and reconsidered. "Mike James wants me just as much as you do. I'm trying my best here. Cut me some slack. I've told him, just like I'm telling you, he doesn't get to have me the same way you do. I have 2 men to care for now, and I'm not shortchanging you in any way." "You're such a fool, Christy. Listen to yourself. Not shortchanging me? That's bullcrap. The fact that we're even having this conversation means I'm getting shortchanged, as you put it so nicely. I didn't sign up for sharing you when we got married, and neither did you. The best you can do is kick this guy to the curb right now and throw yourself on my mercy. End of story. I don't share. Stop asking. You know better." "But you have no idea how much this hurts. Imagine if I had an affair. Imagine I was seeing that cute redhead paralegal for months, told you I loved her and wanted to continue." I looked at her and realized my words were falling on deaf ears. She was too wrapped up in her own situation to grasp the reality of what I was saying. Then she spoke and confirmed it. "Well, I wouldn't like it much, but I'd find a way to come to terms with it." "Bull crap. The only reason you say that is because of the situation you want me to accept. Let's be honest here." "Oh, sorry, I shouldn't have asked that, should I?" That shut her up. Even she couldn't deny the truth in that statement. "You've destroyed me, Christy. You've destroyed us. Don't you get that? I don't care what you keep saying about nothing changing. It has. And that's a fact. No matter what happens now, you've betrayed me forever. Always. Nothing can change that. I'll never accept this, and I have to ask you to leave, because clearly you want to keep this going. Even if you didn't, how could I ever trust you again? You've kept this from me for God knows how long. If you said, 'Fine, I'm done,' then what? How would I know you wouldn't start again with this guy or someone else? How can I trust you now, Christy? But you're not going to stop, are you? You want this. You just admitted it." That really hit home. It was clear she hadn't considered it from that angle. That's the thing about people who strike deals with the devil. They never do. "You've made your choice, and it's not me, is it? Because if it were, this guy would be out of here by now. That's what I want, but you're not going to give it to me. Do you have any idea how that feels, Christy? Do you? No, of course you don't. You've taken everything I had to offer, and now you've taken this jerk too. And now you want to make that choice official. Well, it doesn't work like that. We already made our choices. You don't get to remake them. I have no clue what my life will be like from here on out, but I can tell you this much. I'll never trust another woman as long as I live. You've done that to me, Christy, so thanks for that. Just you. I don't know if I'll ever get over what you've done and what you're trying to make me accept. I think it's sick, but you're so blinded by getting it all for a short time that you honestly believe you can have everything, and I'm the one who needs convincing. Well, screw you. Life doesn't work like that. The truth is, you'll never know how much you've hurt me today. Never. Not until someone does it to you. But that won't happen, will it? Because you'll be too busy getting what you want. Oh, Mike, I'm so sorry. I don't want to hurt you. Really, I don't. Please. Please don't feel that way. Tears were streaming down her face. How the hell am I supposed to feel, Christy? Whatever you got from me, it wasn't enough, was it? What kind of feeling is that to lay on a man you're supposed to love above all else? Tell me, how am I supposed to feel? I don't even know what I did wrong or what you weren't getting. And there's no way you're going to be honest and tell me, is there? You sure haven't been honest so far, have you? There was only silence. Christy opened her arms and hesitantly leaned forward as if to hug me. I held up my hand. No, thanks. The last thing I want is pity love from you. I almost called her a bitch, but I had to keep control of myself. As it was, I didn't even realize I had tears in my eyes until I wiped them away. It was strange, battling both intense rage and profound hurt simultaneously. It was a bizarre mix, like wanting to throw someone off a cliff while holding onto them and jumping yourself. Your mind races everywhere, playing out every scenario to its logical end. She needed to grasp the enormity of the damage she had caused here. Like most people who've done something awful, she avoided facing it, trying to downplay it and find ways to soften the impact with words. She had to do that because deep down, she knew how severe it was and didn't want to confront the responsibility. Once you acknowledge it, you're obliged to take action. Once you confess, you have to fix the harm, and she simply didn't have the tools or ability to do that. Some things can't be undone. The more I could make her realize that, the more she would have to come to terms with being accountable. And I knew her well. She had a self-image that couldn't handle that. She would suffer endlessly knowing she caused this and couldn't make it right. Christy sniffled again, and the guy next to her shifted, as if about to speak, but changed his mind when I glanced at him. There was a pause, then I asked, "So, I get to fool around too, huh? Is that part of your grand plan?" Christy looked up and scowled at me. I always loved that frown. Her nose wrinkled and there were lines between her eyebrows. She said, "Well, I'd hope you wouldn't. Ideally, you'd be satisfied having all of me. That's always been enough before, but I understand I'm not in a position to judge or say no. So I wouldn't like it very much, but I'd have to accept it. With conditions, of course." Conditions? I sputtered. This woman was unbelievable. How the hell had I been married to her for 11 years and not seen this? What had I been smoking and drinking? Is love really that blind? Am I really that naive? Well, no falling in love. Like you did, you mean? Too easy. She frowned again. Another hit. C3, C4, and C5 next, please. Maybe I can sink her battleship this time. No, I mean that's different. If you want to be with another woman, I wouldn't like it very much, but as I said, I can't really judge. I get that. No, you'd have to be sure, like I am, that this is the primary relationship, the main one, that you're mine and I'm yours. Like it's always been. I chuckled at that. Except for the last, 3 months? 6? While you've been messing around with Mr. Funnyman over here? She sighed. It's not like that, Mike. I never stopped loving you. I just expanded my horizons, that's all. I like my horizons just where they are. Thanks, I replied. She perked up at that, clearly taking it as me saying I wouldn't seek out another woman. Great. Well, like I said, as far as you and I are concerned, nothing changes. I love you just as much as before. Nothing changes. That single statement really infuriated me, and in that moment I realized this relationship was finished. Just as much as before. So essentially the same amount of love that allowed her to jump into another man's bed. And since she had done it once, she would do it again. And what do I get, Christy? A part-time wife? Is that how this would work? Part of the time with me and part of the time with Captain Hook here? I gestured towards the guy, James, who was still nervously rubbing his finger. It wouldn't be like that, she replied, her voice trembling. We thought we could alternate time. 2 weeks with you, a few days with James. You're away some of the time anyway. You wouldn't miss the time. You'd get the majority of it like you do now. You were here first. I shook my head and chuckled in that way you do when nothing is funny at all. You're a bit crazy, you know that? How did I miss that all these years? She even smiled back at me and said, "Love is blind." Really, I said dryly with a finality in my tone. I reconsidered. It was astonishing that I was even having this conversation. But then again, it was likely one of the last conversations I'd ever have with her, so we needed to cover everything now. I was surprised at myself when I realized that's how I felt, but upon reflection, I was steadfast in that feeling. And Mr. Perfect here, I nodded towards James, was okay with this arrangement? He glanced at her, then at me, and after a brief hesitation and waiting for her affirmation, he nodded. I turned back to Christy. So, it just happened, did it? There was no planning? You just fell in love? No forethought or intention? I wanted to give her enough rope at this point, and I wasn't disappointed. Yes, you have to believe me. I didn't seek this out. I was happy. I am happy, even more so now. Except for this moment. Hurting you hurts me too. When the consequences catch up, huh? Too bad I'm the one paying the price, not you, huh, Christy? This isn't easy for me either, Mike. I know how upset and angry you must be. I know you're a better man than that, though. I know you can handle it. Oh, so you think you know, huh? You think I can just get past this? I said sharply. She looked away, avoiding my gaze this time. Would you like to hear what I think, Christy? I asked in a softer tone. She glanced back at me, worry evident in her eyes. After a moment, she nodded reluctantly. All right then, here's what I think. This whole thing is nonsense, from beginning to end. All this talk of it just happened is crap, and right now it's spilling over and making a mess. You don't just accidentally fall in love, Christy. You know that. It takes effort. It's about spending time together, making each other laugh. Those little gestures and moments that build closeness. It's intimate, and you don't do those things unintentionally. You choose to let them happen, or at least you choose not to stop them. You know it, I know it, and even this guy here knows it. I could tell I was challenging Christy's core beliefs about herself. She saw herself as moral and ethical, always making the right choices. For many people, saying it just happened is a way to avoid facing their own responsibility for doing something they know is wrong deep down. People often struggle with doing what they know is right because they lack the moral strength to resist temptation, especially when it involves something forbidden. They'll rationalize their actions to make themselves feel better, but deep down, they know the truth. In my experience mediating conflicts, you never directly confront someone about their bad behavior. It rarely leads to a positive outcome. They either accept it and try to justify it to themselves, or they vehemently deny it and dig themselves into a deeper emotional and logical hole. This leads to conflict and defensiveness, and ultimately, no one benefits. There are moments when you can break through to someone, but it usually requires someone they deeply respect, the right words at the right time, and it's easy to mess it up. When someone is deeply in denial, like Christy seemed to be, it's like shouting into the wind. Christy knew deep down that what she did was wrong. She also knew I wasn't wrong about what I was saying. Bringing attention to her actions made it hard for her to face reality. I was trying again to make her see how responsible she was for my feelings. It wasn't going perfectly, but that's normal. Understanding the full impact of one's actions usually takes time. It's rare for someone to get it immediately when it's pointed out to them. You might not have planned this, but you didn't stop it either, did you? That's cheating, Christy. Every action was emotional cheating, even before whatever happened physically. You know that, I pointed out, shining more light on the issue. I knew she'd be thinking about this for days. So your excuse is that I wasn't lacking anything? That's your defense? I pressed further. She just stared back, starting to understand my approach and feeling intimidated. Words are powerful when used effectively, and she knew I was skilled at it. I get it. So, it never crossed your mind that if you had so much love left over for James, then you weren't giving me my fair share? You've decided how much love I should get, and whatever's left is yours to give as you please. Is that it? I challenged. Her response surprised me. She countered, You can love your children and still love your spouse. Did your mother love you any less because there were 6 children? It struck me that they must have prepared for this. They were anticipating my arguments. It showed some level of planning, which I found disappointing. Yes, that's true. But let's be clear. I didn't get what I needed from you. Not at all. But we're not talking about children here, Christy. We're talking about a marriage, I concluded sharply. She flinched at my tone, and I took that as a small victory. I'm so glad you've calculated exactly how much love I deserve. Maybe you should publish a paper on it. I'm sure plenty of other couples would love to know that magic number. Just enough so he doesn't notice any lack, right? She stared back at me, her face pale around the eyes. She knew I was about to confront her head on. What do you think your sister would say about all this? Have you even considered that? I asked, curious. Christy lifted her head defiantly, jutting out her jaw. It was clear she was digging in her heels. I think they wouldn't approve, but if I could explain to them that I never intended for this to happen, that it just did, that I'm seeking happiness, and this is my way to find it, they'd understand. They want what's best for me, she defended. That was true. Her sisters did want the best for her. Yet I knew they weren't blind to her flaws or her choices. Her brother had given me a stern talk on our wedding day. He warned me not to tolerate her nonsense. She burns bright but fast. Stand firm and she'll come around, he had advised. He also mentioned she had some peculiar ideas, but to laugh them off, and she'd eventually catch on. Her reception might not be what she expected. Yeah, I think that's wishful thinking on your part. Once they find out you cheated on me, let's call a spade here, you slept with another man, and then lied straight to my face about it. There's no getting around that. Do you really think they'll be okay with that? Do you think your brother will approve or understand that, Christy? I emphasized with air quotes. She lowered her eyes briefly, then met mine again, speaking softly. They'll understand. I know they will. Just like you were sure I'd come around to this idea? 0 for 2 so far, babe. Not a great track record, I retorted. She sobbed once and wiped her eyes, clearly upset. I wasn't going to back down. You know, even after I tell you to leave, you'll just go running to this guy. I glanced at James, who now looked at me with hatred. He caught on to what I was implying. Leave? She interrupted weakly. After all, you love him, right? You said so yourself. So when I say go, where will you go? Don't act like you haven't thought about this. I know you have. You knew there was a chance I wouldn't accept this situation, and the way it's been set up, giving it up wasn't an option, so out you'd go. Have you already moved some of your stuff to his place? I'd check, but I don't want to get up. Her voice sounded distant. I thought maybe you'd need time to adjust to the new, she faltered, then changed tack, avoiding what she didn't want to answer. I'm not giving up. Even if you make me leave, you are mine and I am yours. I'll always be here. You know it. Interesting. She was fighting me on my own turf, trying to manipulate my emotions. She knew I always found the best solutions in my professional life, and she believed she was offering the best one here. So, your plan was to live with a man who knowingly pursues another man's wife, a man who shows no respect for someone else's relationship. You're now tying your emotional life to a guy who sits on my couch, drinks my beer, and claims another man's wife. Is that the standard you're settling for these days? Wow. That struck a nerve. I saw her glance at James, who looked back at her, shaking his head and smiling dismissively. Babe, he began before I leaned forward. In a low, menacing voice, I said, Last warning, James, or they'll be calling you Jimmy One Ball, got it? And he's tying himself to you, I continued. An established cheater. Once a cheater, always a cheater, right? Well, you two deserve each other, that's for sure. It might be fun at first. Lots of guilt-free closeness, at least on your part. I doubt there ever was any on his. But when it gets old, and it will, it always does, what happens when he's late from work? Or you are? How will that work out, now that you both know what the other is capable of? Who will start doubting whom, I wonder? She glanced at James again, who shook his head, gave a weak smile, and made a face that said, This is nonsense. But the damage was done. Christy prided herself on her ability to judge people accurately. She valued her own ethics highly. Tonight, those values had taken a beating, and she was smart enough to recognize the truth in what I'd said. Even worse, now that those words were out there, they couldn't just be brushed aside. The inevitable confrontation about this, everyone knew it would happen, would now revolve around these accusations. In a tense situation like this, how could it not be the first thing on her mind? With this revelation, their relationship was doomed from the start. That seed of suspicion had been planted and it wasn't going away. In a sense, their entire relationship was based on a lie, something that was slowly dawning on her now that I was pointing it out. Christy turned to look at me, her eyes wide. She understood the gravity of my words, and I knew it had unsettled her. It was only surface level for now, but it would dig deeper over time. She had gotten away with deceiving me because I trusted her. She knew he would never trust her the same way, and I had just made that painfully clear. Good. Another hit. I still wanted to make my point. Time to deliver the final blow. I took another sip of beer, finishing the can this time. I even burped, casually timed. But you know what really hit home? I said. More tears welled in her eyes. For a situation where they were supposed to be explaining their new reality to me, she wasn't saying much. Deep down, you're actually a pretty awful person. That cut deep. Whatever else Christy believed about herself, she truly thought she was a good person. She had sayings about it, how good people sometimes make mistakes, how almost no one is inherently evil. Most people faced tough situations and felt they had no choice, or were pressured into them. I hadn't thought much about it before, but recently I'd come to realize Christy was an idealistic person. She was one of those who always emphasized personal responsibility. Now I'm also a liberal. I support socialized medicine and caring for everyone across the social spectrum, among other things. But I firmly believe in personal responsibility. You might have reasons for your actions, and I might empathize with those reasons, but that doesn't absolve you of the responsibility for what you did. Maybe you didn't have a girlfriend and faced teasing from women, but that doesn't justify taking a Magnum into a bar and doing it to cheerleaders. There's no excuse for that. You did it, for whatever reasons, and those people are just as dead now as they were moments ago. Understanding your reasons doesn't magically bring those people back to life. She genuinely believed she was a good person who might do something bad, but she'd feel awful about it afterward. When someone you deeply love says things like this to you, things you desperately don't want to believe but deep down know there's truth in, it bypasses your conscious defenses. You recognize its truth, even if you wish it wasn't. I was one of the people she trusted most, yet I was labeling her as evil, and I meant it. By exposing her self-delusion, she knew I had reasons to believe it, which meant she would likely start to believe it too. That kind of self-doubt, especially supported by someone you value and trust, is the worst kind to feel. Even though I had a stake in saying it, I hoped she wouldn't dismiss it. I knew she would internalize it, and self-belief is incredibly powerful. All right then, time to make her feel truly terrible. The truth is, Christy, every time you look in the mirror, you'll remember this day. You'll remember what you said, what you did, the pain and damage you caused, all because you claim you didn't mean to fall in love. Well, that's not good enough for me. It was a choice you made. Why, I can't even begin to guess, and I don't think you know either. But that doesn't change the fact that you did it, and this is the outcome. I'm going to ask you to leave soon, and if you're smart, you'll go. I've never hit a woman before, and I love you deeply. But if you stay here, I might not be able to control myself, especially not with this guy around. Know this, you're an evil person. Everything you've done here is pure evil, and everyone we know, your family included, will see it that way. I can explain it to them just like I did to you. Think about the consequences of your sordid affair. You've destroyed the one thing in your life that was reliable, and there's no one else to blame but yourself. You're undeniably a truly evil human being, the kind who harms others and then tries to avoid responsibility by downplaying the damage. I hope you end up alone and in pain. If I were you, I'd seek professional help. It's too late now, but I'd want to understand why so I wouldn't repeat it. So go ahead, leave with your serial cheater and enjoy wondering where each other are all the time. Meanwhile, I'll sit here drinking myself to death, wondering what I could have done differently. I hope the closeness is worth everything you've lost. Now go. I sat there staring at her, and she stared back. She was about to speak, hesitated, and then began, "This is my house, too." That's when I lost control. I stood up, shouted as threateningly as I could, "Get out, you damn 403!" I threw the empty beer can at the wall, but it didn't have the impact I'd hoped for. I was too furious to care. She wilted, and James stood up, glancing at me with concern. He looked away and quickly escorted a visibly frightened Christy to the door. "Wait," I said, realizing I had one last thing to do. It dawned on me in that moment, a fitting end to the night. I approached her. She recoiled from me. I grabbed her left hand, forced her clenched fist open, and removed both her engagement and wedding rings before she could resist. Then I took off my own ring, held all three in my fist, and said, "Wait right here." I walked to the bathroom next to the kitchen, opened the door, and left it ajar. Looking back at her pale face, I dropped all the rings into the toilet and flushed it without watching. "Seems fitting. You flushed our marriage down the drain, so down go the rings too." I knew this would deeply hurt her. Those rings meant a lot to her. She had spent 3 months finding the perfect ones made from metal reclaimed from her father's ring. I didn't take pleasure in doing it, but it felt symbolic. At that moment, I just wanted to hurt her. I'm not proud of that feeling now, but it's how I felt in that exact moment. She gasped at what I did, whispering, "No, no, no, I didn't want this," in a small voice. "One more thing," I said, and in the middle of saying thing, I punched James square in the face. I put a lot of force into it, and his nose crunched under my fist. Blood splattered everywhere as he fell to the floor. Christy stared at him, then back at me. I shook my fist, grimacing at her. "Now you can go. I'll change the locks tomorrow. Expect the divorce papers." It was over. She knew it, and so did I. She wouldn't be able to face herself in the mirror after this. She wouldn't be able to face her friends. She'd spend a lifetime regretting today, what led up to it, and what she did to our relationship and her own image. Right then, I had no sympathy for her. I had been betrayed, cheated on, and humiliated, and damn right I was furious and wanted revenge. I briefly considered that she might do something drastic, but at that moment I was too devastated to care. It's not a feeling I'm proud of, but in that moment I couldn't have cared less. It makes me look bad, but I've never been easy to live with, especially in moments like this. She knelt beside him, fussing over his injuries, and I grabbed him by his hair. With that, I opened the front door of the condo. Without a word, I pushed him out, blood dripping onto the hardwood floor. Christy followed in shock. Once they were out, I slammed the door shut in their faces. I stood there trembling for a moment, then turned and went back into the living room, grabbing the bottle of peach-flavored vodka from the counter. I knew what I had said earlier, but I had no intention of drinking myself to death, though I definitely needed a good drink now to calm down. Life was for the strong, and I refused to be a victim, even though that's exactly what I felt like. I'd have to find a way to move forward. Tomorrow is another day.